So, God forbid, if a nuclear weapon reaches its target, what happens? What, perhaps you could say what you think would be the first target hit. Would it be the Pentagon?
I was told by many people I interviewed that the biggest fear in Washington, D.C. is what's called a bolt out of the blue attack. That's an unwarned nuclear attack against Washington, D.C. The target would be the Pentagon. And that's what I begin the scenario with, And I reported in graphic, horrifying detail what happens
Yes, you
because
did.
I don't know what's worse, me writing that all out or the fact that it's all documented by the Defense Department. I mean, they have been documenting the effect of nuclear weapons on people and animals and things since the earliest days of the Cold War. And all of the details I pull are from these documents like the effects of nuclear weapons. And again, this document was the original information, the original data in this document come from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? It was all classified. And then it was built upon by those 200 some odd atmospheric nuclear weapons tests we did. And we're talking about like millimeters and inches. We're talking about the Defense Department knowing that, 7.5 miles out, the upholstery on cars will spontaneously combust. The pine needles will catch on fire. They will start more fires. You have all kinds of mayhem and chaos happening based on reported facts from observations. And this is really shocking and grotesque at the same time.
So, one warhead reaches the Pentagon, everybody in the Pentagon perishes.
180 million degrees. The fireball on a 1 megaton nuclear weapon is 19 football fields of fire. Think about that. Nothing remains. Nothing remains.
And there's then a radius where people die immediately, and then there's people that are dead when found, and then there's people that will die slowly.
Yes.
The centric rings.
And again, rings defined by defense scientists. But before that, the bomb goes off. Then there's this blast wave that's like several hundred miles an hour, pushing out like a bulldozer, knocking everything down, bridges, buildings. I mean, you can read FEMA manuals about what the rubble will be like. You're talking about 30 feet deep rubble as the buildings go over 6, 7, 8, 10 miles out. That speaks nothing of the mega fires that will then ensue. So once all these people die, and third-degree radiation burns, did you even know there was such a thing as fourth-degree radiation burns? Right? We're talking about the wind ripping the skin off people's faces many miles out. And then you have a sucking action, right? Everyone is, or many people are familiar with what the nuclear mushroom cloud looks like, and its stem actually creates, and again, this is from, physicists who advise the Defense Department on this, the sucking up into the nuclear stem, 300-mile-an-hour winds. You're talking about people miles out getting sucked up into that stem. When you see the mushroom cloud, Lex, that is, in a nuclear war, that would be people. Those are like the remnants of people and of things in the cloud. 30, 40-mile wide mushroom cloud blocking out the sun. And that speaks nothing of the radiation poisoning that follows.
And then the power grid goes out. Basically, everything we rely on in terms of systems in our way of life goes out. You write, quote, "Those who somehow manage to escape death by the initial blast, shockwave, and firestorm suddenly realize an insidious truth about nuclear war, that they're entirely on their own. Here begins a, quote, fight for food and water." I mean, that is a wake up call on top of a wake up call, that we go back to a kind of primitive fight for survival, each on their own.
And by the way, those details were given to me by Obama's FEMA director, Craig Fugate, who was in charge of. So FEMA is the agency in America that plans for nuclear war. Okay. And what Fugate said to me was, Annie, we plan for asteroid strikes. These are called low probability, but high consequence events. And FEMA is the organization that, when there's a hurricane or an earthquake or a flood, FEMA steps in and they do what's called population protection planning, right? They take care of people. And what Fugate told me is after a nuclear strike, after a bolt out of the blue attack, he used those terms, there is no population protection. Everyone's dead, right? And he means that metaphorically, but also kind of more literally, because he just said at that point, you just hope that you stocked Pedialyte.
What do you think happens to humans? Like, how does human nature manifest itself in such conditions? Do you think like brutality will come out? Like people will, just for survival, will steal, will murder, will...
I can't imagine that not happening. I think that's why people love post-apocalyptic television shows and films, because they see that. And then, of course, there's always one great charismatic person who's trying to restore morality. And these are great narratives that people like to tell themselves in the world of science fiction. But what we're dealing with is science fact in this scenario. And it is meant to terrify people into realizing, wait a minute, this is a conversation that absolutely should be had while it can still be had. Because the realities, when you have the director of FEMA telling you this, it's a real wake-up call. And by the way, Craig Fugate was so transparently human with me, and I quote him directly in the book, but he spoke about, you asked me earlier about like what would be going through the president's mind, and we don't know, I don't know. But Craig Fugate told me what would be going through his mind. And he said along the lines, I'm paraphrasing, like it's almost something you couldn't even comprehend. It would just like ruin you. His words are really powerful. And of course, the FEMA director in the scenario is notified in that first window while the launch, while the ballistic missile is on its way, and no one in America yet knows. And I have the FEMA director pull over to the side of the road and jump in a helicopter that's sent for him to take him to the bunker that FEMA goes to, which is called Mount Weather. And so he's aware that Fugate was aware that as FEMA director, you would likely be taken to a safe place, however many hours you're going to be safe, or days, or maybe weeks, or maybe months. But as I also learned from the cyber people I interviewed, that, there's a complete fallacy that these military bases can continue functioning. They run on diesel fuel. And when the fuel stops pumping, there's no more generators.
Electricity's gone. Communication lines are all gone. The food supply, all of it, all the supply chains is gone. It's terrifying. And that's just in the first few days, first few hours.